Hello there, everybody. Today we are doing part 2 of the Phantom Rewrite. So Star Wars Episode 1, rewritten by Dante Alexander Wilcox. If you haven't seen the first video or my introduction video, please click this link or the following one, and you should watch those and then come back and see this. The last video ended at the end of the Tatooine segment of the film, and so now we're carrying on with the rest of the film. So we're back with our main cast, our Padme, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, Anakin, Jar Jar, R2-D2. They've just left Tatooine. As the ship arrives on Coruscant, they're met by Palpatine and Chancellor Valorum. Padme is greeted by Palpatine and is at this moment when she blows her cover. She doesn't wait until she gets back to Naboo. She reveals her true identity at that moment as the Queen. Jar Jar and Anakin especially are surprised, but obviously everyone who works for her would have known who she was all along. She says that the ruse has done its job and there's no need to carry on with it. She then informs Chancellor Valorum of the situation, and he says that they'll call an emergency Senate session. Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Anakin bid the rest of the group farewell as they go to meet with the Jedi Council. At the Jedi Temple, they arrive at the Jedi Temple, and all of the Jedi Council members are present except for Yoda. Yoda's not present. Qui-Gon asks about Yoda, and Mace Windu tells him that he's been missing from his last mission. All the Jedi show a lot of concern, but they move on anyway. Qui-Gon then shares with the Masters about their encounter with Darth Maul, and Ki-Adi-Mundi, which is the tall forehead guy, mentions the Sith rule of two, that there's always a master and apprentice. Mace Windu believes that they encountered the Master, considering how powerful the guy was. But Obi-Wan expresses the opposite opinion. Anakin then asks why there are only two, at which point Ki-Adi-Mundi gives a brief history about why the Sith have this rule of two thing. And then we have a new character. Jedi Master, a female named Shaak Ti, expresses her doubt that the mystery can be solved at this time on Coruscant, and she entreats Qui-Gon to continue escorting Padme Amidala. Obi-Wan mentions his concerns for the Queen's safety if they are also having to contend with Sith Lords. Aayla Secura, another female Jedi, stands, saying she will accompany them to Naboo. All the other Masters agree this will be wise. Anakin then speaks up and asks why they don't all go, to which Ki-Adi-Mundi asks who is this, annoyed at this boy's interjections. Qui-Gon defends the boy, saying he is highly gifted with the Force and wants to become a Jedi Knight. Most of the Masters nod their heads in approval, while Ki-Adi-Mundi states that he is too old, to which a few other Masters, just a few, nod in approval. Shaak Ti states there have been stranger additions to the Jedi Order, and it would be wise to not underestimate his abilities. Anakin looks at her, thankfully. Now, I'll talk a little bit about all these changes at the end of the video. Back at the Senate, the session is about to start, and Senator Bail Organa is meeting with Queen Amidala, who is now dressed in her full royal attire. Bail is actually Queen Amidala's cousin in the rewrite. The Amidalas are related to the Organas as royal families. Bail asks her about the particulars of her journey, and Padme says that he'll hear about all in a minute. The session of the Senate starts, and Valorum begins by running through the boring stuff, and as he's talking, Palpatine turns to Padme and laments at Valorum's Slavic adherence to tradition, stating how when he wins the election to Chancellor, things will be changing. Now, as I said in the previous video, we establish in this that Palpatine has already been running for Supreme Chancellor. Padme briefly defends the tradition of the Senate, while Jar Jar, who's also present, supports the idea of change, and he and Palpatine exchange like a meaningful glance. At this point, Padme has called forth to state her claims. She discusses the invasion and the exile that she's been forced into, and then the Trade Federation has its own representatives in the Senate, and they come forward and offer a pretty valid defense to discredit Amidala. Valorum wasn't expecting this to happen. He was assuming that it would be fairly cut and dry, and this reveals that he was kind of a fool. So then Valorum requests an investigative committee. Palpatine gets up and passionately rebukes the idea of a committee in this instance, stating if we do not take action, lives will be lost. He receives a standing ovation for this remark. So you have senators across the board who love Palpatine. Valorum states the only thing that they could do on the matter is to hold a vote to form a Republic army for the purpose of this accusation. They hold the vote, but nearly every senator votes no, as they are afraid to get embroiled with someone else's war, particularly senators from Mandalore. After the vote, Tarful, a Wookiee from Kashyyyk, and Bail Organa express their support to Amidala personally. To this, Palpatine thanks them very warmly, but Anakin seems suspicious of Palpatine. Amidala thanks them and states there is no time to lose. If they are to send support, they must send it now, or her people will continue to starve and die. Bail recognizes the severity of this situation and plans to leave for Alderaan immediately. Tarful says he will do what he can to convince his chieftains to help and leaves too. Padme still feels deflated though. While she likes Tarful and Bail and believes in their intentions, she cannot wait on their own systems of bureaucracy. At this, Anakin states he will save her people. She smiles at him warmly, but obviously doesn't believe one boy can do that much. Jar Jar suddenly speaks up and says, "We must unite the humans and the Gungans. It is our only hope." Padme likes this idea, and she says, "Jar Jar, you are right. We must draw upon their knowledge of battle, but will they listen?" Jar Jar replies, "I think they might." Panaka speaks up and actually says, so in the previous video I established that Panaka hates the Gungans, or at least used to hate the Gungans. But he says this at this point, "I agree with Jar Jar, it is our only hope." They decide to leave immediately while Palpatine insists they should remain. They could die. Padme says, "A queen who does not lead the battle in the hour of need is no longer a queen." She walks out and everyone who came with her follows suit. Palpatine hangs his head in sorrow. We cut back to the ship approaching Naboo, and Jar Jar is trying to determine how to bypass the blockade this time. Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Aayla Secura say they want to try something. They sit down and after a few seconds, they say, "Go, now." They push through and not a single shot is fired at them, and no one notices their passing. Jar Jar is perplexed, but asks nothing. Padme and Anakin are stunned in amazement. Anakin asks what they did, while Padme talks to Aayla Secura. Qui-Gon states, "Later, now is not the time." Jar Jar pilots them to where he thinks the Gungans would be, and he goes out and searches for them, but again, their cities are abandoned. He says that there's only one place they would be, and they start heading inland. They find a giant statue, Gungan statue, and behind the statue is a long tunnel that leads underground. At the end of the tunnel is a massive cavern with a giant underground ocean. A city is built into the walls of the cavern. All of the non-Gungans are amazed at the sight. They meet Boss Nass, the leader of the Gungans, and Jar Jar goes forward and says that we need to fight against the droids with the humans. Boss Nass says he has never met a trustworthy human. Padme steps out, humbling herself before Boss Nass, and she starts to discuss how she has worked tirelessly within her government to improve relations with the Gungans. But not until Jar Jar binks had she ever met one who was willing to lay down his life for her, and she was willing to lay down her life for his and for their whole people. Boss Nass is impressed by this willingness to self-sacrifice. He says he's impressed, says, "Okay, the time for hiding is over. Gungans, we go to war." To this, there is some confusion at first, but then the Gungans erupt into cheers, shaking the whole cavern with noise. Roose Tarpals, which is the Gungan general, happens to be Jar Jar's old friend or something like that, and he meets with Jar Jar and apologizes for never believing in him. Padme and Panaka contact Sio Bibble, who's been on Naboo this whole time, and they say that the time for your suggestion to rise up the people is soon. Be ready when we give the signal. Padme thanks him. At this point, Sade has been rescued off screen, and she rejoins Padme, and she's been redressed to look like the queen. Padme tells her that her bravest task is yet before her. Later, the battle begins. The humans and Gungans are walking together out into the field. So in the original film, there's just Gungans, but this time I wanted there to be a lot more unity between the races. The leaders of the battle discuss that they must have the army draw the attention of the droids while Padme and her aides and the Jedi get into the capital and capture Nute Gunray. Someone makes a mention about the blockade and the ships around the planet, saying that there's, a control ship out there controlling the droids. Panaka mentions that the sooner they get into the capital, the quicker they can get ships in the air. Padme looks into the sky, seeing the glint of one of the enemy ships, and says we can only hope and pray. Then the battle begins. Sade, dressed as the queen, walks in front of the army of Gungans and humans, with Roose Tarpals alongside of her. She gets within shouting distance of the droid army, shouts a taunt, drawing their attention, and then the battle begins just as it does in the film, but much better and cooler. The queen and her team are going into the city, and they're going through a service tunnel. Then everyone is in place, and Padme gives the signal to Sio Bibble for the uprising to start. Suddenly, people fill the streets of Theed, and they throw the droids into disarray. Then they start making their way to the palace, and they find their way at the hangar to get some guys in ships and fly them out into space. But Darth Maul is at the hangar waiting for them. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan immediately start fighting him. And just like on Tatooine, he is vicious, and it is hard for them to fight back. The rest of the team moves on, except for Anakin, who sees a ship and takes the initiative to hop in one. He joins a small group of other pilots who are already making their way into orbit, and they start fighting. Back on the plains, the army is beset upon by the droids. They seem unending, but the people are better soldiers overall, and we reinforce this sense of unity between the races. However, the numbers begin to overwhelm them. In the hangar, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan begin to wear Maul down. Darth Maul does manage to separate the two of them, however, and corners Qui-Gon alone. Out in space, Anakin and the other pilots are shooting down droid ships, but they swarm like locusts. They're everywhere. All of a sudden, surprising everybody, ships from Alderaan and Kashyyyk arrived and join the space battle. Anakin takes this opportunity of confusion to use the Force to identify which one is the control ship. He notices one off in the distance that isn't well defended and goes after it, and intentionally flies into the docking area to discover where he can shoot it down. Padme, Jar Jar, Panaka, Aayla Secura, and the rest of her guards make their way to the throne room. Along the way, Panaka is shot, and Jar Jar leaps to his defense, not even thinking about it. Panaka is touched and asks Jar Jar for his forgiveness. But the wound is too much and Panaka dies. When they reach the throne room, Newt Gunray is helplessly undefended. Gunray mentions how hopeless it is to do anything as long as a control ship is active. However, back in space, Anakin finds what he was looking for and shoots it, and it starts a chain reaction explosion on the ship and immediately flies out of the hangar. The ship explodes, causing the same chain reaction of all the droids shutting down on the ground. Out in the field, everyone's cheering. Out in space, everyone's cheering, and you see Padme and her crew cheering. Then we come back to the fight with Darth Maul. Qui-Gon is reaching his last leg against Darth Maul. He sees Obi-Wan running toward him, but Maul cuts Qui-Gon down. Obi-Wan doesn't see this, but Qui-Gon dies immediately. Obi-Wan screams in anger, stops in his tracks when Maul turns toward him, and Obi-Wan suddenly sits. Maul is confused, but his hate renews and he rushes Obi-Wan. As Maul approaches, Obi-Wan hears Qui-Gon's Force Ghost encourage him. He thinks he's still alive. He takes a stance, and as soon as Maul is within range, Obi-Wan is filled with the Force and moves faster than Maul can even see and cuts him in two. Maul falls to the ground, writhing in pain. Obi-Wan runs to Qui-Gon's side, thinking he's still alive, but when he sees he's dead, he mourns. And then he says, "How did I hear you?" But he doesn't get a response. And in the background, we see that Darth Maul has somehow crawled away. With the battle finished, all of the victorious parties are now reunited on Naboo's surface, celebrating their victory with a massive feast and celebration. So it's not this weird parade thing with a glowy orb, it's just a party. Anakin and Jar Jar, among others, are being honored for their heroic deeds. R2-D2 then goes into the ownership of Padme Amidala, because originally he was owned by Panaka. Anakin then goes out and finds Padme and says, "I told you I'd save your people." She smiles with genuine gratitude. "Thank you. I'm sorry I ever doubted you." Anakin has become a public hero, and people all around him are cheering him on. Padme eyes him with curiosity, admiration, and attraction. Palpatine is also there, and Padme congratulates him on his election. So we find out that he has won the election to Supreme Chancellor, and says that she'll have to find another senator to equal his abilities. Palpatine eyes Anakin with scrutiny. We see the same cloaked figure from Tatooine walking down an alley on Coruscant and descend a steep stairway into an abandoned factory. We thought the cloaked figure was Darth Maul, but this is a different character. There, this character sees Darth Sidious. Darth Sidious pulls back his hood, revealing a man we haven't seen yet. An old man. Remember, Palpatine's in his 50s. This guy looks like he's in his 90s. This old man says, "Welcome back, Darth Ventress." The cloaked figure removes her hood, revealing Asajj Ventress, who says, "Maul has failed, as predicted." Sidious turns away. Good. Two more cloaked figures join them from the shadows, and they all walk away. Back on Naboo, Anakin is sitting alone on top of the Palace of Theed, staring at the setting sun. He's smiling contentedly at first. Then he breaks and a single tear rolls down his face as he says, "I need her." We cut to Shmi on Tatooine, who stands from helping a slave, feeling Anakin's voice in her ear. Then we cut to Padme, who turns to see the setting sun of Naboo as though she'd heard the same voice from where the sun was. And that's the end. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe, like the video, share it with any friends of yours who are Star Wars fans, and I'll see you tomorrow or next week or whatever. Maybe I won't see you. Maybe you'll just see me. We'll find out.